I know. Some of you are probably wondering where I've been. And I have been gone for a while. Long while. 2 months while. And while you're probably wondering about that, you know what hasn't been gone for a while? Police brutality, racism, crisis in Yemen, crisis in Palestine, as well as endangerment to LGBT plus rights, especially trans rights. So let's talk about that for a minute. So before I get into any of these topics, I want to say like 2 things. Number 1, I get them kind of late to, well, no, I'm very late to addressing a lot of these things, especially like on this platform. I've been spending a majority of my time on Twitter, and I've been retweeting a lot of stuff on there. Regardless, I still did want to make a video about essentially everything that's still going on. I don't have a lot of subscribers. I also don't get a lot of views, but I mean, still kind of wanted to bring light to some of these things and sort of discuss them in case somebody does watch this and didn't know a lot about the things going on. Now brings me on to point 2. Point 2, this shouldn't be the only like research that you do on the things that I'm mentioning in this video. Topics like, you know, Black Lives Matter, Yemen, Palestine, etc. Those are things I'm not really an expert on. I did research, but I also still need to do more research on a lot of these things. This is essentially just like the forefront of info. Like, there's still a lot more that needs to be learned and discussed and etc. Especially if you do want to be a good ally in terms of those topics, it is important to do a lot more research than just this video. I did link some cards and articles and also petitions and GoFundMes, etc. in the description. You're free to click on those, do more research, also lend a helping hand. That'll be cool. Paramore may have said that ignorance is your new best friend, but that was about growing up and letting go of old friends. It was not about being racist, transphobic, or being blatantly unaware of global issues going on right now. That being said, let's start. As you guys may and should know, there have been a ton of protests going on in regards to Black Lives Matter and police brutality, as well as, you know, the racist system surrounding the policing system. Obviously, the Black Lives Matter is not a new movement. It's actually been around for quite a while. 6 years ago, quite a while. It was actually started by 3 people: Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi. They formed Black Lives Matter after the death of Trayvon Martin, who, as you guys know, was shot and killed by a man named George Zimmerman. Their main purpose is to obviously fight against racial injustices as well as keep Black people safe. This time around, however, the movement has gotten a lot more coverage than it has in the past. On May 25th, George Floyd, a 46-year-old Black man, was killed by Officer Derek Chauvin. Derek Chauvin knelt on George Floyd's neck while Floyd kept repeating that, you know, he couldn't breathe. And instead of getting the partners to stop, Officers J. Alexander Quang and Thomas Lane continued to restrain Floyd while Officer Tao prevented anybody from intervening. After Derek Chauvin kept his knee on Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 45 seconds, Floyd passed away. The entire time, which was 8 minutes and 45 seconds, George Floyd begged these officers for his life, essentially, and they didn't care. Even after witnesses told the officers that he seemed to be unconscious, even after the ambulance showed up, Derek Chauvin kept his knee on his neck and didn't do anything. It was after this that people began to get rightfully angry and demand change, which resulted in hundreds of protests, not even just all 50 states, but like in different countries as well. You know, one thing that I do want to say before getting into some of these demands, if you're gonna state an opinion on the protests or the riots and lootings that happened or are still happening, even though media isn't talking about it, they're still happening. If you're gonna say an opinion on that and you yourself are not black, maybe just don't. I know it's weird, like not giving an opinion on how people who are constantly oppressed by a racist system is handling that. It's crazy, crazy. When it comes to what's happening right now, I keep seeing and hearing people essentially blaming violence on the protesters, as in they think that they're the ones behind it. First of all, just want to put it out, some of the violence that you're seeing is being caused majority of the time by the police. If anything, it's being caused by the police all the time. You can honestly find thousands of videos, cops shooting tear gas on peaceful protesters, fighting people who weren't even doing anything to them or in the protest. And as for actual lootings and riots involving large corporations like Target, they're gonna be fine. They're a large corporation. It's a bit of property damage that they're gonna recover from. A bit of property damage isn't gonna kill these places. They're gonna be able to rebuild it, and by the end of it, they're gonna be just fine. Not to mention, some of the biggest historical changes happened because of riots, looting, etc. Let's look at the civil rights movement, how LGBT plus community got rights. Everything that we learned about in school, those things weren't achieved because of peaceful protests. Things got violent. I know it's hard to believe, things in America getting violent. Okay, moving on. Some of the main demands that the Black Lives Movement are trying to obtain are defunding the police, cutting military budget, as well as abolishing prisons. If you're confused by what all that means, I'm gonna try my best to explain it as cohesively as I can. But when it comes to defunding the police, it means taking away the billions of dollars that goes to the law enforcement and redirected to make things better suited for our communities. Majority of arrests are already kind of like minor things, yet about $100 billion of government money still goes to them. You know, it doesn't get that type of funding. Schools. It just seems crazy that police get that much money and they hardly use it. But schools, that's something that should be getting funding like that. Abolishing prisons is a bit self-explanatory. Prisons, they need to fucking go. Our prisons aren't keeping the bad people away. They're mainly filled with people of color as well as poor people. Not to mention, majority of the time in prison doesn't do them any better. And instead of one being locked up, they would go to a new rehabilitation center where they can make genuine progress in improving themselves. To be honest, I'm still kind of unsure how I feel about this demand, but that's mainly because I know that I still have to do more research on it. I still see the good behind it, and I still believe it's something that we need to fix because prisons as a whole do a lot more bad than good. Lastly, cutting the military budget. This is essentially the same idea as defunding the police. I still don't know too much on this one, so I can't say for sure that it's the same idea, but it is quite similar from what I said. And what I and a lot others can say is this: to cut the military budget that we have currently, and we can cut it in half to solve a lot of problems as listed here, and we would still have the most expensive military in the world. Also, this is merely an opinion, an observation, if you will, but I don't know how okay I feel with the military budget being about $700 billion, but then you have the CDC, which I'm worried for at this point, if you've seen newses. Their budget is only like 11 billion. And we're in the middle of a pandemic. Does anyone feel like that's not okay? Also, a bit of a side comment that sort of relates to this, but does anybody else not feel okay that we have the most expensive military in the world? Like, it's pretty fucking expensive. Yet we can't protect soldiers like Vanessa again. She was stationed in US Fort Hood and they couldn't find her, and she was missing since late April, right after telling her mom that her sergeant was sexually harassing her. And not only that, but they just found her body like this month in July. And also they found 4 more bodies of 4 different missing soldiers while they were looking for her. Does anybody else not feel okay about that? It shouldn't be happening on a military base. If we're giving them that much money, why is stuff like that happening still? Okay, so that's not even the entirety of the movement. That's honestly the tip of the iceberg, and I'll leave more resources in the description of this video. But before I move on to the next topic, I do want to end on this note. A lot of people don't seem to understand that those in positions such as cops and the military aren't really protecting us, mainly cops in this case. It all stems from a very racist system and power abuse that you do need to do a lot of research on. Not only that, but to try and understand how it affects minorities. You do really need to take the time to learn and understand that, all cops, regardless of what they preach, are bad because of the system that they come from. The only good cops that are good are the ones that are fired for doing that good, or who leave after realizing what a fucked up system that they work under. And just to give you an idea of how often that we have to keep talking about this and how often this sort of thing happens, Breonna Taylor, she was a 26-year-old EMT. She was asleep in her own bed in her own house in Louisville, Kentucky, and when cops Brett Hankinson, Jonathan Mattingly, and Miles Cosgrove barged into her home unannounced and shot her 8 times. This happened March 13th, and they have yet to be charged with anything. Elijah McClain, he was a 23-year-old man who played violin for Stray Cats in Aurora, Colorado. Late August 2019, he was walking home from a store after buying some iced tea for his brother when officers Nathan Woodyard, Jason Rosenblatt, and Randy Rodama confronted him before later beating him to the point of vomiting, putting him in a sort of chokehold, and later having paramedics inject him with a suspicious amount of ketamine to the point that he ended up having a heart attack and later died in the hospital. This happened a whole year ago, and not a single officer was arrested behind that. And Tony McCade, he was a 38-year-old trans man who was on a walk before being shot by an officer at 11 a.m. Witnesses says they just heard shots, no statement letting him know that he was a cop, just immediate gunshots after he stopped the car. And because the laws of Florida has, nobody knows this officer's identity, and there's been no public updates about this case, but you can probably guess what happened. That's only 4 people. That's 4 people out of hundreds, probably thousands. Learn their stories. Look for more if that doesn't tell you that there's a problem here, because there's very clearly many problems with this system. Don't forget about them. Say their names. Also, fucking demand justice, because this is fucking ridiculous at this point. And also, because I know people are fucking stupid and they continue to be fucking heartless, if you're going to do things like going on protests and stuff like that, try to not make any videos about it. Don't post videos of you going to protests online. Don't post about it on social media. Don't tell others that you have been going to protests, especially if you haven't talked to them in a very long time. There are people that are hurting those who are attending these protests, and there's even been some suspicious hangings of several black people in places like California, New York, Texas, and probably a lot more. So obviously, please be safe, and there'll be resources in the description if you do decide to go on protest. Speaking of police brutality, I do want to also bring up what's going on in Serbia, because media isn't really covering this, probably because their president doesn't want people to know that he's letting his people die, which seems to be an ongoing theme for really fucked up political leaders. Okay, recently the people of Belgrade, Serbia have begun protesting their president's dictatorship after news came out that their government has essentially lied about COVID-19 numbers. During the period of time for elections, businesses continued as normal while infected numbers continue to increase. Yet the media reported very low numbers, and it wasn't until the end of June, after elections have passed, that their president, Alexander Vučić, I'm sorry if I pronounced his name wrong, but also he's been killing people, so I don't really care, he stated that he would be putting them on a 3-day lockdown. Obviously, the people were outraged and took to the streets, which resulted in a violent response from the police. Protesters have been pepper sprayed, tear gassed, beaten with sticks, and there was one report of a man who was simply sitting on a bench and he was attacked by the police. And this isn't solely because they were put on lockdown, this is because they were lied to by their government and put in danger for the sake of their elections and their economy. And because their president owns all media, it's not getting as much attention as it should. When the president spoke about what's happening, he mainly praised the police and even laughed at the protesters. As of now, the most information I could find is just how the violence is continuing in these protests, and the media is still struggling to report it correctly. I just want to make it clear they're not protesting because of this curfew, they're protesting because they're lied to about COVID-19 numbers, among obviously other things, and they decided to fight back. Reliable sources are honestly very scarce in regards to this. Some of the resources that I've been able to find come from the protesters themselves, so please double check what it is that you're getting your information from. There obviously will be links to threads, cards, etc. that will give more information that I couldn't share in this video, but as far as helping them out, the most we can really do is talk about this situation. Post about it on your Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, fucking MySpace if you still use that. Just let these people be heard. You've been living on the rock. Yemen is on the verge of extinction. Their situation has only worsened with the rise of COVID-19. The people of Yemen are dealing with one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world, as well as dealing with famine, disease other than COVID, as well as an ongoing war with Saudi Arabia. According to this article by Amnesty International, as well as causing the deaths and injuries of thousands of civilians, the parties to the conflict, aka the war I just mentioned, have exacerbated an already severe humanitarian crisis, resulting from years of poverty and poor governance causing immense human suffering. Some 24.1 million Yemenis today require humanitarian assistance to survive. According to UNICEF, the conflict has left at least 500,000 public sector workers without salaries for 3 years. An organization estimates that 12.24 million children are in need. And if that wasn't enough, a lot of these things are straight up human rights violations. According to the United Nations Human Rights Council, in addition to these violations related to the conduct of hostilities, the parties to the conflict in Yemen are responsible for arbitrary deprivation of the right to life, arbitrary detention, enforced disappearances, sexual violence, torture, ill treatment, child recruitment, violations of fundamental freedoms, and violations of economic, social, and cultural rights. And for anyone curious of how America is involved, because we're involved with everything, the US is actually responsible for the weapons used against those in Yemen. The US and Saudi Arabia are economic allies. Also, sorry to be kind of a downer to the Obama stand, but According to this, the Obama administration also helped aid these war crimes against those in Yemen. Also, I know that like Trump is also bad as well. His entire administration is like fucked up. Just to make things worse, guess who prevented $10 million from being sent to help those in Yemen during this crisis? Of course, there's going to be links to different cards, petitions, threads, etc. in the description, but you could also call your representatives and tell them to, I don't know, support a legislative action that will demand the Trump administration to end their support of Saudi Arabia's hostilities in Yemen, and maybe, just maybe, provide the country better humanitarian aid. Just a thought. There's actually a script to read to them at the bottom of the first card in the Yemen section, if you're curious about that. Talk about Yemen, send in donations, do whatever you can to help, because Yemen fucking needs it right now. Anti-terror bill is a law in the Philippines that prevents those in the country from convicting specific acts of terrorism. So these acts, in the bill's terms, can include carrying harmful weapons, destroying property belonging to the government, but it could also be posting / sharing / writing posts related to terrorist activities, which means participating in rallies can also cause serious risks to the public safety, and also donating to organizations that aren't government / state recognized. The reason why this bill is a danger to the rights is the same reason why you don't see many Filipinos speaking about it, because it essentially takes away their freedom of speech. Negative posts about this could result in dangerous repercussions, which, in blunt terms, the government could literally order an arrest of them and have them placed in jail for 12 years. Because this bill allows the state to determine what they consider terrorist behavior, anyone could be a target. So July 9th, the bill has already been put in place, and now it's up to those outside of the Philippines to try and help those in the Philippines out. Petitions in this case unfortunately don't really work or do that much, but emailing representatives, making donations, as well as spreading the word about it does help a lot more. This bill is a violation to human rights, and it needs to end, so do what you can do in order to help them. So I'm gonna preface this by saying this was pretty hard to try and sum up in a cohesive way for this video, and I'm still trying to learn more about what's going on, but I did still want to mention what's happening in Palestine because it's fucking bad. A lot of this information that I'm gonna share will be taken from the Free Palestine card that was actually made by Bintul Vent. I hope I'm saying their right. It'll be linked in the description. Really informative, and the creator is Palestinian themselves. I highly recommend checking it out, especially if what I share seems confusing, or if you just want to learn more about what's going on. To put it as simply as I can, which, again, as I've said before, is really hard to do, Israel is trying to make Palestine disappear through suffering and violence, and it's kind of working. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu promised to annex 1/3 of Palestine's already occupied West Bank starting July 1st. The announcement comes after US President Donald Trump introduced the Middle East Peace Plan, which continues to support Israel while promising Palestine more than $50 billion if the country adheres to a list of conditions, such as succeeding or formally withdrawing from areas in the West Bank. Essentially what that means is that Palestinians will be stripped of their rights, shelters, and resources. Prior to this, Israel authorities have already begun bombing those residing in Gaza, as well as killing those taking part in protests against them. Not only that, but they have been reported to be straight up demolishing Palestinian homes and wrongfully arresting and detaining Palestine children. As of July 2020, there have been 12 members of the US Congress who have made statements to make possible moves to block this annexation, but many people have said that that won't stop something from this from being happen again. It'll just keep being brought up. That was a very brief rundown of the situation in Palestine. In order to get the full picture, please read the cards down below, as well as donate to organizations actively trying to help them out. Speak up about Palestine, learn how to free them, and, don't support people who support Israel. As per usual, LGBT plus issues. That list can go on and on forever. But alongside with what's happening with Poland, I do want to quickly add on some stuff that's also happening in the US, cause fuck. So for one, the Trump administration that I spoke so highly about earlier in this video, those big guys in the White House. Yeah, they're proposing this new rule where homeless shelters can essentially ignore someone's gender identity and house them with their assigned sex from birth. Shelters can't turn away, say, a trans woman or a trans man, but they could put the woman in the men's section and the man in the woman's section of their shelter. Also, Idaho. We all know Idaho. Yeah, recently they put in 2 new laws that essentially bans trans people from changing their sex on their birth certificate and banning trans women from playing sports that align with their gender identity. And let's not forget the fact that there's been an increase in murders whose victims are mainly trans people. That being said, please protect and check in with your trans friends, family, etc., especially black trans friends and family, because the world is real fucked and they need people. Let's get on to Poland, because what the fuck is going on there? During Poland's last Pride Parade back in 2019, people blocked the streets in order to harm and threaten the parade goers. They even threw things such as rocks, fireworks, and as well as glass. One organization even went as far as disinfecting the streets because they saw LGBT plus people as harmful beings that were toxic to others. Because of this, the governor of this city made the parade illegal while blaming those who were a part of the parade for the violence. That was only a year ago, and things have yet to improve since then. Recently, the president of Poland, Andrzej Duda, had recently signed a law called the Family Card that was proposed by the conservative organization called Ordo Luris. This law essentially bans LGBT plus ideology in public spaces, sex ed, and prevents same-sex couples from adopting children. The same guy also donated money to manipulate the media in order to make him look good. Again, this seems to be an ongoing theme in corrupted political leaders. Also, just as a little side note to show just how much fucking awful this president can get, remember that organization that I mentioned earlier? They also want to ban all types of abortion and prohibit divorce. People of Poland really need other people to speak up more about it. Of course, there's petitions in the description along with the card that includes a lot more info that I couldn't really cover. Donations will also be included in the description. Much like the card says, the more people that hear about the issue, the higher the likelihood of it changing and saving lives of tons of LGBT plus people. Although these topics were briefly talked about, there's still a lot more that needs to be learned about them. Also, I obviously couldn't cover everything that's been going on in the world. There's still a lot more fucked up stuff that's going on in the world. But these topics were the ones that I had seen around the most frequently on my media, and they were also a bit more simpler to gather up info about them. Brain cell can only do so much, and it's doing its very best right now with the state it's in. The next video will be a bit more dumb than this one. Meta content will be making a comeback soon. I was gonna explain my absence, but what other excuse could I have other than my deteriorating mental state? Do you really want me to expand on that? Because you shouldn't want to. Unless you're my therapist, then you have more of a reason to. Obviously, Twitter, you know the drill, twitter.com/earlytry. I really try to inform. You should really try to inform yourselves on a lot more. This video is already going to be pretty long, so I'm going to try and get onto the fun editing stuff. Stay safe, stay healthy, try to stay healthy at least. Wear a fucking mask, do that. I'm gonna stop recording and go to bed. Bye. Speaking of racist systems, don't say you don't support the riots or protests, but then turn around and say that you support cops in the military. You can't say that you hate violence, but then you support killers in the same breath. Like, A plus B don't make any sense in that case. The way that I have seen people say we need to focus on the bigger fight to be there for Black Lives Matter in order to defend their friends from saying like the N-word or just being blatantly racist, but then you'll like look on their Twitter profile and then you'll see like maybe one or at most 2 retweets about Black Lives Matter. That's right, I'm checking your fucking Twitter profiles. Put less focus on defending your racist friends and more focus on fighting the bigger fight. Like, usually killing people, right? It's like a bad thing, frowned upon by majority of people. Unless you do it in a uniform, and then it's suddenly okay. If you just genuinely think about it, think about how many of the people who are in the military or who, you know, are cops, think about how many people they have killed. Serial killers never fucking left, bro. They just got jobs in the military and in policing. Also, this isn't like really a global issue, but can we stop supporting problematic people? If I have to see one more fucking blank is over party, but then they're like still making money because they apologized, I'm gonna fucking rip my hair out, and my mom doesn't want me to be bald, so she's gonna kill me. So essentially what I'm saying is I'm gonna kill myself. New national anthem ideas. 1. Scooby-Doo theme song, the one done by this simple plan. 2. Me crying while reading the president's tweets as I bang my head against the wall repeatedly. Any other ideas, write them in the comments.